Whether it is in Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, or the Americas, a theme often features prominently: protests. These are demonstrations that arise when individuals feel grievances that compel them to act in order to bring about a desired change. It often reflects feelings of disempowerment, marginalization, neglect, or disregard, even in democratic contexts. But how exactly does this happen, and is it effective? All this we will be considering on History World Ville. For eons, humans have always resisted whatever decision they do not think is in their best interest. What, in a sense, can now be termed as protests. From children telling their parents they prefer a kind of food to the other, to agitations, life threatening issues like Black Lives Matter, citizens often send messages to their leaders and rulers that enough is enough. For much of human history, then, protests have been a common form of expression, from individual demonstrations to mass assemblies of people who gather together in solidarity, which most of the time are peaceful, while at other times can be violent. Some of the most significant protests in the modern era include what is now known as the Protestant Reformation, spearheaded by the German theologian and priest Martin Luther, whose simple act of non-compliance by kneeling on a German church door, his 95 thesis that outlined his grievances with the church, sparked the religious revolution of the 16th century that led to the Protestantism split from the Catholic Church, which most people at that time also had various grievances against. The Boston Tea Party was also another protest that proved very effective and instrumental, especially in the American Revolution that followed in its wake. It happened on December 16, 1773, when a group of American colonists, frustrated with the excessive taxation, decided to send a clear message to the tyrannical British government by dumping 45 tons of British tea into Boston Harbor, contributing immensely to the colonists' push for independence. Indian activist Mahatma Gandhi's Salt March between March and April 1930 also depicts an influential act of non-violent civil disobedience in protest of British rule in India. Over a period of 23 days, Gandhi and more than 60,000 of his followers marched to the Indian coast to collect salt, an act then barred by British law. The Salt March helped oppressed Indians win global support in their struggle for independence. Protests could also be in form of strikes and boycotts, and a good example of this was the General Nigerian strike led by Michael Imodu in 1945, which was a landmark 44 to 74-day industrial action against British colonial economic policies that undermined the welfare of workers, as soaring inflation and high cost of living after World War II made it impossible for workers to survive on their wages. Over 150,000 workers were involved in this resistance, demanding 50% increase in the cost of living allowance and a minimum wage of 2 shillings and 6 pence, including payment of pension and non-preferential treatment of European workers over their African counterparts, eventually compelling the British government to make most of the demanded concessions as well as reconsider their labour policies in the nation. You can also talk about the 1963 March on Washington. In August of that year, legendary civil rights icon Martin Luther King Jr. led a massive peaceful demonstration at Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. to call on the government to pass meaningful civil rights legislation. It was an historic event that King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech in front of the more than 200,000 people who had joined the march. So far then, protests can largely be categorized into three respects: It could take on the form of civil disobedience, like that of Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her bus seat for a white passenger in 1955. It could be non-violent, such as those led by Martin Luther King Jr., Michael Imodu, and Gandhi. Or in the extreme, it could be a violent protest, like the 2020 protest that took place in American cities following the police involvement in the death of George Floyd. But despite divided opinions on the effectiveness of these demonstrations, one thing remains clear: protests arise out of perceived injustice or insensitivity of existing authorities to the plight or grievances of those within their jurisdiction, as well as the protesters' belief in their ability to make a difference by coming out with a community of like-minded people to demand a change. And while some of these demonstrations has been squashed or brutally suppressed by government opposed to dissenting voices, some protests have indeed metamorphosed into movements and revolutions that made a mark in different facets of human existence. So the next time you see voices rising on the street or online, remember, behind every protest is a demand to be heard, a demand for a change, a demand for justice. The question is, will you be part of it?